Okay. I think we're good. And welcome back, everyone. I hope you're finding the discussions we've had so far enlightening. This one right here definitely will be. Before we begin, please feel free to use the Q&A function in WebEx at any time throughout the presentation to ask questions. I will voice the questions to Ron during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. There's been a lot of good things going on in Washington, D.C., most notably the bipartisan infrastructure bill making its way through Congress. ITS America has been an integral advocate and advisor on many of the measures put forth in the bill, along with shaping technological sustainability and equity landscape in transportation. Ron is here today to discuss these policies and legislative efforts being discussed. So our speaker today is Ron Thaniel. He is an interdisciplinary government relations and public affairs strategist with over 20 years of experience collaborating with Capitol Hill, federal agencies, and advocacy organizations to innovate transportation. Ron is currently Vice President of Public Policy and Legislative Affairs with the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. In this role, he advises and represents cities, states, transit, automotive, technology, infrastructure, and research universities before the U.S. Congress on intelligent mobility and infrastructure policy, including automated, connected, on-demand, and electrified transportation. For this, Ron served as Deputy Secretary of Transportation to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, where he advised Governor Cuomo on one of the most extensive subway, bus, and commuter rail capital plans in the Metropolitan Transportation Authority in New York's history. Previously, Ron was Executive Director of the National Association of City Transportation Officials. He represented cities from 14 states before Congress and the US DOT on urban mobility policies, urging the federal government to adopt roadway guidelines for protected cyclists and pedestrians, and federal direct transportation aid for cities. He also served as Assistant Executive Director for the U.S. Conference of Mayors, leading transportation policy and representing mayors before Congress, federal agencies, international organizations, and governments. Earlier in his career, Ron served as Director of Government Affairs Northeast for Amtrak and as transportation aide to then Minneapolis Mayor Sharon Sayles Belton. Away from ITS America, Ron is an avid runner. With that, I'll pass it on to Ron.
All right. First of all, good afternoon from Washington, D.C. It's great to be here on behalf of ITS America. As Kevin mentioned, I'm Ron Thaniel, Vice President of Public Policy and Legislative Affairs for ITS America. Thank you for the invitation. It is well timed with everything happening in Washington, as Kevin referenced. And I don't remember a time in my career in this town where it has been this busy. It's a good thing. As you know, it's time to rebuild our nation's infrastructure for a technology-driven global economy. Next slide, please. Second. All right, actually, next slide, please. Okay, just stay there. For those who may not be as familiar with ITS America, we are an association of public and private organizations focused on advancing the research and safe deployment of intelligent transportation technologies. Our core policy focus at this point covers AV, smart infrastructure, V2X, mobility on demand, emerging technologies such as personal delivery vehicles and blockchain. We also very focused on sustainability and resiliency. Our vision, a better future transformed by intelligent mobility, one that is safer, greener, and smarter. So the big news here, and I could not be more excited, is we have a new president and CEO at ITS America as of this past Monday, Laura Chase. Laura has been with ITS America since 2015 and was the association's chief operating officer and my direct boss until recently. Laura is known in Washington's policy and advocacy circles, including time in the Clinton White House with the truckers, ATA, and US Telecom. Stay on this slide. I'm about to move to this slide now. So let's get into the surface transportation reauthorization. With the Senate approval last month, it's hard to believe it's September, of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and House consideration of the bill on or before September 27th, and that's an interesting issue that I will speak to in more detail shortly. We are at the top of the ninth inning. And I'm a big baseball fan. In fact, I know this is Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. I'm a Yankee fan, New York. But we're in the ninth inning of a 3-year education advocacy campaign here at ITS America, centered on significantly expanding intelligent transportation technologies and the reauthorization of the FAST Act. Policy developed by ITS America over 9 months back in 2019 is throughout the Senate infrastructure bill, including first-time eligibility for cybersecurity, first-time eligibility for vehicle-to-pedestrian technology, mobility on demand under highway programs, transportation system electrification, connected automated vehicle research, and more. Also, with the awakening to transportation equity issues over the last few years, the association added this year to a more traditional ITS policy as detailed, and you can see the screen, the slide. It's our Surface Transportation Reauthorization Platform cover. It's called Moving People, Data, and Freight, Safer, Greener, Smarter. A focus on how transportation technologies can increase equity, including an equity policy that gets right at the heart of this issue, that calls for consideration of technology's effects on those least prepared to use it, or who face particular barriers to adoption to ensure their safety, access, and mobility are not compromised. Key to this policy is increased investment in public transit with a focus on technology. We have historic funding for transit in the Senate infrastructure bill, and likely more coming in the reconciliation bill coming together now. In addition, given the sharp increase in roadway fatalities and injuries in 2020, ITS America developed a National Vision Zero for all technology-focused policy that supports the deployment of safety-related technology. So what we've done, we are big fans of Vision Zero. We've added technology to enforcement, education, and infrastructure. And the Senate infrastructure bill has delivered on that as well. Now, we did not get everything we wanted in this bill. It's a very good bill. And we held to the hard-fought wins from the FAST Act in 2015 that really made technology eligible, including V2X, under the FAST Act. And we expanded significantly on technology eligibility in the infrastructure bill. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's dive into the process here. And this is an interesting slide, and I want to give credit to Bloomberg government for explaining a very complicated process in a way that makes sense. So, regular order of business within the committee process for a surface transportation reauthorization. You would have the committees on the Senate side, EPW with highways, banking, housing, and urban affairs with the transit title, commerce, science, and transportation with technology, safety, rail, freight, and finance, figuring out how to pay for this. Conference with bill coming out of the House that covers financing of the bill through Ways and Means. And of course, the T&I committee with a massive oversight of surface transportation programs. It's almost like a super committee with oversight of transit, highways, environment, the entire package, rail. And so that's normal process. So these committees work, and ultimately they pass a bill in the House and Senate, then you have conference, and then you have a product that comes out of the conference. That's not what has happened. Next slide, please. Okay, so what has happened is what's known now as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And this is a direct result of the president prioritizing rebuilding of America's infrastructure. On Tuesday, August 10th, the Senate approved the roughly $1 trillion Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. Kevin mentioned referenced it as the bipartisan infrastructure bill. People still say that more than the actual title. It's also known as IIJA. The bill passed the Senate with strong bipartisan support, 69 to 30. You don't see that much in this town nowadays. Strong vote for the bill. It includes $550 billion in new federal investment. Of that, $274 billion would go to the U.S. Department of Transportation. Within that, $110 billion will go to roads, bridges, major projects. $66 billion is reserved for passenger rail and freight, and $39 billion for public transit. Next slide. So this is a slide with a lot of detail. So I'm going to try to pull out the detail, but it's important that you understand the new spending included in this bill, because we're talking about a lot of money. So, for example, you have $12.5 billion for national infrastructure investments. Now, my time at Amtrak, I know about the tunnel under the Hudson River. And there's always been that struggle to try to figure out the funding to pay for mega projects in this country. This program, $12.5 billion national infrastructure investments, is a step in the right direction to provide funding for mega projects that this country desperately we need to figure out how to fund. You got $500 million for strengthening mobility, revolutionizing transportation grant program. And this is, the way I see it, a new ITS deployment program. It's $100 million annually for projects that incorporate innovative transportation technologies, including automation, connected vehicles, and intelligent sensor-based infrastructure. I mentioned Vision Zero earlier as a priority for ITS America. $5 billion in this for safe streets and roads for all grants. You got billions of dollars for bridge investment. I'm going to talk about that in more detail. You have $5 billion for National Electric Vehicle Formula Program. With additional funding, you have $7.5 billion in this bill for EV infrastructure. You got a lot more money for infra grants, which you know this well. It's a very important grant program. It's a program that localities and states have used to deploy technology. Of course, we have truck emissions at ports. This is a climate issue, greenhouse gas issue, and it's $150 million for that. We got to keep doing the research. And I saw a data point last year that within the US DOT overall budget, 0.03% is allocated for research. And this bill would provide $95 million on top of what's already there for university transportation centers. And of course, this is a key way to research emerging technologies. We are looking at historical spending on America's infrastructure. Next slide, please. So let's dig into the surface transportation reauthorization. The bill includes the surface transportation reauthorization slated to expire at the end of September. As you will remember, last September, to avoid election year politics, the Congress passed a one-year extension for the FAST Act. That's the 2015 law. And so what the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act contains is a full 5-year surface transportation reauthorization. It carries largely intact Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works passed Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act from May, and also the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation Surface Transportation Investment Act that passed the Commerce Committee in June. It mostly carries over FAST Act policy for transit programs based on discussions with the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. The committee never did get around to putting out a transit title, which I will speak to in more detail. So we have $90 billion for the highway program, $28 billion for the transit program, for a total of $118 billion from the general fund to keep the highway trust fund solvent for the life of the reauthorization. It's FY 22 through 26. It includes $350 billion for the highway program, $10.5 billion for safety under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, also under National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. We have $91 billion for public transit. That's a record amount of funding for public transit, and it's needed. Now, there's also going to be an effort, I'm sure, to get an additional $10 billion for transit and reconciliation. That was a big issue around IJA from transit advocates and cities in particular, that it did not fully meet the amount of money that the president had said transit would receive in his infrastructure plan. So there's likely will be an effort to get an additional $10 billion for transit and reconciliation. $16.1 billion for mega projects. I've already talked about that. Urgently needed. You have to rebuild these major mega projects that in many ways were built in our parents' generation. I can go on and on. We talked about the Hudson River Tunnel. We have major bridges across the country, and we have to rebuild these projects. Next slide, please. All right, so this is another, I apologize, the technology, it's a word-heavy slide, and I actually sent Kevin ITS America's full analysis and summary of the infrastructure investment bill. But I'm going to talk to you a couple key highlights. Now, this is really important because the bill includes many new opportunities to deploy intelligent transportation technologies, for which ITS America has strongly advocated for a long time, starting with maintaining FAST Act technology eligibility. Many of you, I'm sure, were part of our effort back in 2015 to expand eligibility. It was largely focused on V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle technology, and also vehicle-to-infrastructure, V2I technology, in addition to some of the technology programs under the innovation title. But job one always is to maintain. So you want to go into reauthorization focused on maintaining what you have. What we have done with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we have significantly expanded technology eligibility to the programs listed here. There are others as well. Most notably, first-time eligibility for cybersecurity under the National Highway Performance Program and Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. This is a significant win. Our members helped us, Texas DOT in particular, really carried this for us. We have been urging House and Senate transportation committees since 2019 to make cybersecurity eligible under formula programs. I cannot tell you how much I hear from our states, localities of the urgent funding need to safeguard critical transportation assets, systems from cyber threats. And we struggled because we always run up against a jurisdictional issue on the Hill, if that's Homeland Security. But our state DOTs, they are not comfortable going to the Department of Homeland Security for funding. And you know how this works. The money goes to the state, the governor allocates the money to state priorities from a cybersecurity standpoint. It was critical for ITS America to make sure that states or transit agencies could go directly to the DOT for cybersecurity funding, and this bill delivers on that. Also, we have focused on vehicle to infrastructure technology. This is perhaps the single most important technology to reduce fatalities on our roadways that we have. And we have made the argument for a long time that this should be treated like other safety tech investments in the surface transportation bill and receive a 100% federal match. The bill does that. It is now eligible for up to 100% federal match for V2I in work zones. I've talked about the pedestrian and cycling fatalities that we've seen over the last year. And a priority for our ITS America has been making vehicle to pedestrian technology eligible. And it is for the first time under the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which is critical under this program in particular, because of course you have a sub-allocation element under the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program that allows for localities to access funding. And so there is a new source of funding to build out technology to protect pedestrians and cyclists. We have micro-mobility under CMAQ. I mean, you can't go to a community across the country, in particular the cities, and don't see bike share and scooter share. And so for the first time under CMAQ, micro-mobility is eligible. There's a new rural surface transportation grant program, and we often think about on-demand transportation for the urban areas of this country. Rural communities, elderly populations that want to stay in place. Well, this program makes on-demand technology eligible. This is a $400 million per year new rural program. You have a carbon reduction program, $1.3 billion per year, and intelligent transportation systems and V2I eligible. You have a new program called Protect. It's promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, cost-saving transportation. And intelligent transportation systems, again, eligible. This is a $1 billion a year program. We have new competitive grant programs. We have also key. It ramps up funding significantly for two existing competitive grant programs. Infra, $8 billion over 5 years now, including $4.8 billion from the Highway Trust Fund, an additional $3.2 billion in appropriated funds. Also, for the first time, it codifies on a statutory basis, raise, or used to be billed and was Tiger at one point. This is a very popular program that provides $7.5 billion over the life of the reauthorization. $40 billion for bridge investment. It's the single largest dedicated bridge investment since the construction of the interstate highway system. And key to that investment is technology, including V2X is eligible. All told, we are looking at potentially billions of dollars in new technology investment. Next slide. Okay, EV. A priority for ITS America, if you look at our vision statement, it is safer, greener, smarter. Greener is the key point there. It's been a priority for ITS America to increase investment in EV infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure. We also support investment in natural gas infrastructure as well. The bill provides $7.5 billion in EV charging infrastructure funding, $7.5 billion in zero and low emission buses and ferries in funding, and then $73 billion to build a more robust electric grid to support an EV transportation future. This is really important when we get into AVs in particular. We can talk about that in more detail. I also overstaff the Automated Vehicle Standing Committee. Within the Automated Vehicle Standing Committee at ITS America, we're having a conversation around should AVs be zero emission vehicles. We got to make sure the electric grid can handle all of this. So again, $73 billion for a more robust electric grid. Next slide, please. Expanded research opportunities. This, as I pointed out, 0.03% funding for research in the US DOT's budget as of last year. That's not enough to build out and develop the next generation of emerging technologies. This bill increases investment in research, including it reauthorizes the Intelligent Transportation Systems Program Advisory Committee. This has been a priority for ITS America. We pushed back efforts in the last administration to sunset the ITS Program Advisory Committee. I don't think it was an issue directly with the Program Advisory Committee, with this particular Program Advisory Committee. It was more about the fact that the administration did not embrace advisory committees in general. Our argument was this is the last time, why would you want to sunset the Program Advisory Committee for Intelligent Transportation Systems at a time when we see big data, automated vehicle technology, and connected vehicle technology really about to come to its potential that we have wanted for years. And so we fought hard to protect this program. It is reauthorized. It is reformed in many ways to make sure that you have the infrastructure owners and operators, you have the developers, you have the transportation commissioners at the local level, at the state level, participating in the advisory committee. And we will make sure that the administration moves forward and will use the expertise from the advisory committee. Next slide, please. So there were missed opportunities as well. And I'm going to talk about those opportunities. And I hope we can figure out a path forward with these opportunities. The first is mobility on demand. So the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, both Democrat and Republican leadership, struggled for months over transit funding levels, among other issues. And it did not release a transit title for the FAST Act reauthorization. But as a result of this, mobility on demand, a key priority for ITS America, is not included in the bill. ITS America successfully established mobility on demand under FTA programs in the House-passed Invest in America Act. However, that's no longer in play. We will continue to look for avenues to establish mobility on demand within FTA programs. We think it's critical, especially for first mile, last mile activities, equity activities around transit. Other area that we did not get in the bill is an amendment that would have allowed for EV infrastructure in the right-of-way of federal aid highways. The Senate failed to agree on passing additional amendments for the infrastructure bill. And so as a result of this, the Senate did not consider an amendment from Senator Feinstein of California that would have allowed for the installation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the right-of-way of federal aid highways. This is a big deal. We have remote areas of this country where you don't have a private entity that can provide for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. You may not have an Indian tribe, for example, to provide for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And without this language, these areas will not have access to electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It's a very big missed opportunity. We're going to try to figure this out, but it's a blow. We also, again, with cybersecurity, I referenced that earlier, a big priority for ITS America. And we want to make sure that transit agencies can use funding, safeguard their assets from cyber threats, which are increasing every single day. And if you have a minute, take a look at ITS America's testimony from the Senate EPW committee in July. You can find it on our website. That speaks to this growing cybersecurity threat that our nation's transportation system is facing. That said, it's a good bill, and we urge Congress, the House, to pass the bill no later than September 27th. Next slide, please. So this gets into a complicated process now, known as reconciliation. The House of Representatives approved on Tuesday, August 24th, a roughly $3.5 trillion budget resolution by a vote of 220 to 212. It was along party lines. The vote will allow the House Democrats to move forward with a two-track process that includes reconciliation with Build Back Better Act spending priorities as outlined in the President's Family, Jobs and Families Plan, in consideration also of the infrastructure bill. As you may have followed in the press, you had 9 moderate Democrats say that to Speaker Pelosi from California, that they wanted the House to vote first on the infrastructure bill that passed the Senate, and then vote on the budget resolution. Speaker Pelosi reached an agreement with the 9 moderate Democrats that she would bring up the Senate infrastructure bill no later than September 27th. Now that's key, because the challenge here, and keep an eye on this, you still need to get the reconciliation bill to a good place where progressives will feel confident that the reconciliation bill will move forward to vote on the infrastructure bill. So it's going to be a tight couple of weeks for the Senate to finish its work on the reconciliation bill. As Speaker Pelosi said, the House will take what the Senate develops. House committees are still working on their language as well, but this is really largely driven in the Senate process. So here's what's happening next. The budget resolution provides reconciliation instructions to 13 House and 12 Senate committees to develop their policy, their recommendations, I should say, no later than September 15th. And so at that point, the committees will forward to the budget committee their recommendations, and the budget committees will combine the legislation from the committees into one bill, and we'll move that bill to floor consideration. This will allow the Democrats to pass the Build Back Better Act, which is, again, human infrastructure without the threat of the Republican filibuster. ITS America is in discussions with House and Senate committees on including the policies not including in IIJA, for example, electric vehicle charging in federated highways or mobility on demand, but we're not optimistic, as those items are not the types of policy. Those are policy-only provisions that do not have a budgetary impact and likely would not survive the Byrd rule in the Senate. Reconciliation is a complicated issue, and I'm not an expert on reconciliation in any way whatsoever. But it comes with restrictions. So if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. The Byrd rule, named after Senator Robert Byrd, Democrat from West Virginia. The Byrd rule, which is Section 313 of the Congressional Budget Act, was adopted in the mid-'80s. And it limits what can be included in reconciliation bills. They include, for example, cannot include measures with no budgetary effect. Cannot include measures that worsen the deficit when a committee has not achieved its reconciliation target. Measures outside the jurisdiction of the committee that submitted the title or provision. Measures that produce a budgetary effect that is merely incidental, non-budgetary policy change. Measures that increase deficits for any fiscal year, the reconciliation window, outside the reconciliation window, So that's an interesting point there. So, for example, any infrastructure spending in the Reconciliation Act must be spent by the time we get finished the 10 years of the reconciliation bill. So that's a very interesting provision I want to point out. And the last point is the measure cannot include changes in Social Security. So it's a nice little chart that I found at the House Budget Committee. It kind of explains a really complicated process of what's permitted and what's not permitted. But yeah, so if you have additional questions on reconciliation and bird rule, happy to talk you through the questions and perhaps even bring on, I would say, more experts from the House and Senate to kind of explain what that is. So that said, so I'm a baseball fan. We're in the top of the ninth inning. The game is not over. However, again, as a New York Yankee fan, I'm feeling pretty confident, as we always feel. Congress will approve this infrastructure bill with the surface transportation reauthorization this fall. I mean, there's always that outside chance that an extension might be needed for a few weeks. But I think we are in a good place. And I think Congress also recognizes that if they don't get this done this year, we get into 2022, which will be very difficult as we are looking at a tough midterm election. So with that, next slide, I'm happy to take questions. And thank you. Kevin?
Thank you, Ron.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? I'm looking through the QA. I don't see a question yet. I guess just in the meantime, until somebody does, regarding the surface transportation cybersecurity,
Mhm.
missing words for ransomware, things like that. Is there any talks of that happening elsewhere outside of what's going on now?
Well, DHS, which is a primary source of funding for cybersecurity, is very active. And this administration, especially with the pipeline hack earlier this year, is very focused on cybersecurity. And so we applaud them. Secretary Buttigieg is very focused on cybersecurity as well. What was the missing piece here is, and I apologize if you guys hear my dog barking. The missing piece here is our DOTs are comfortable with going to the US DOT for funding. And they are not so comfortable going to DHS, and going to DHS, you get into other issues at the state level or the local level. And so our priority was to make sure that a state DOT could access cybersecurity funding directly through the Department of Transportation. What we did not want was a small grant program. We wanted to make sure that it was eligible under a large formula program, as we have in the infrastructure bill. You should know that there are other cybersecurity opportunities throughout the bill. I just named the two key points. Under the research title, under the University Transportation Program, there's a greater focus on cybersecurity. So there's, for example, you have the VMT pilots. By the way, there's a national pilot. There's increased funding for the state pilot as well. And there's a greater focus on cybersecurity within those pilot programs. Under the energy portfolio, you have cybersecurity as well. So it's interesting. I looked at the 2015 FAST Act. If my memory is correct, cybersecurity is mentioned once in 2015. In the infrastructure bill, cybersecurity is mentioned like 256 times. So there's a clear recognition of the growing threat around cybersecurity. And Kevin, I can send you the link to our former president, CEO Shailen Bhatt's testimony from July on cybersecurity. It really does get into the details of the threat to intelligent transportation technologies with cybersecurity. So I can also forward that to you as well.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Mhm.
Pass that on to our member.
Sure.
See, Kevin, any questions come your way?
Did have one just come in.
Yes.
Are additional earmarks still allowed?
So that's a great question. The Senate never did take a position on earmarks. That was largely on the House side. And of course, I think it was 5 billion or 6 billion in earmarks in the House Invest in America Act. And also you have earmarks in the House Appropriations Bill as well. It's not called earmarks any longer. It's what member priority projects. It's not at this point in the IIJA. There was talk at one point within the T&I committee, the chairman DeFazio, as to adding the earmarks from the Invest in America Act to IIJA. And that was when he was very vocal on reopening IIJA. That's sort of passed at this point. I wouldn't doubt he's still looking at a way to move forward on the member priority projects. But that said, he's no longer pushing to open up the Senate infrastructure bill. And with that, it's not quite clear how he would attach earmarks. I want to be clear, I'm being careful about earmarks because it splits our membership. We actually had a lively debate on should ITS America take a position on earmarks back in the spring within our Smart Infrastructure Standing Committee, led by John Barton with HNTB and Cordell Schachter with New York City DOT. And it really just split our membership where we end up not taking a position on earmarks. So, I can't offer any more other than I don't see a path forward on earmarks with this bill at this point. Okay. I guess still there?
Yes. Not seeing any more questions. So, you have anything to plug before?
I do. If you go back, well, I don't want you to have to go back to the slide. First of all, we have the annual meeting in Charlotte, in North Carolina, in December. Right now, it is in person. We are looking at a virtual component, but we would love to have our members join us for the annual meeting. We are developing the program right now. I think it's going to be a good meeting. And then, of course, we have the World Congress next year in Los Angeles. You may recall we had to postpone the World Congress last year in LA because of the pandemic. And so we really hope that we can get this pandemic behind us. I think everyone does. And we can invite the world to the US next year in Los Angeles. We're really talking about a lot of really cool stuff, urban air mobility and using some of the highways in LA for AV testing. But we have to be optimistic, and we're going to move. The plan right now is to have the annual meeting in Charlotte in December, and of course the World Congress in Los Angeles next year. So again, it's been a real pleasure to join with you. And if you have want to invite me back when we get the bill done, I'm happy to give you an update on where things stand. My gut is you're not going to see much of a change from what we have now with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It's just too tricky to tamper with it with the slim. I mean, you need 60 votes in the Senate, and that was just highly negotiated legislation. I don't see any major changes to that bill. So again, happy to come back and share my closing thoughts. Also, love to come back and talk about automated vehicles at some point in the future. Pennsylvania DOT is very active within ITS America. We have an automated vehicle standing committee. It's long overdue for a federal framework for automated vehicles. This is a safety issue. We are urging the administration and Congress to figure out a path forward, put in place a federal framework for automated vehicles. We're doing a very interesting exercise right now, though. We have developed task forces to put together policy for automated vehicles covering climate, equity, safety, and infrastructure. It sort of falls under the administration's overarching priorities. We're hoping that to have our policy done this fall and to take the policy to the administration, hoping that will generate interest and the benefits of highly automated vehicles. We're starting to see the administration look at some of the concerns, I'm going to say it like that, around, for example, Tesla crash data. But we're waiting to see the administration focused on what we see are real promising opportunities around automated vehicles, from transportation to public health to accessibility. And so we're hoping that we can offer these priorities as a roadmap for the administration, again, climate equity, infrastructure, and safety, to fully embrace the opportunities around automated vehicle technology. So that's really it on my end. And if Kevin, I will send you the link to the cybersecurity testimony. And if you have any questions after this, you want to shoot them my way, I'm happy to always answer the questions at a later date as well. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And look forward to seeing you later on.
Sounds good.
Love to
Thank
have
you.
back.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. With that, I'll turn this over to Amber.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Ron. That was so much information, and sometimes it's just very, very hard for us to kind of get an understanding. So really appreciate how you did some explaining for us on that. So for those who may have not been part of our first day, which was a highly successful day, we're giving away door prizes. And ITS Pennsylvania had the honor of giving back to our membership by offering free memberships. So that's what we're raffling off right now. So the winner of this will have their firm's membership paid for in 2022. So if you are an existing member, that means you won't have to worry about paying your dues. But if you're a new member or not a member, we will sign you up to become a member. So with that, let's see how and side note, if you're with Gannett Fleming, you are precluded since you won the first one. Congratulations, Evie. You have won your firm membership. All right, everybody, thank you so much for participating in this session. Our next one will begin at 2 o'clock, which is our PA panel with regional updates. We will see you all then.